What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. The mid-season patch just went live with some hero changes as well as adding summer games to the game. In the arcade, you can play Lucio Ball Remix, and the all-new Winston's Beach Volleyball. They made a series of adjustments to the On Fire system. In general, it's harder to get now. These changes, I believe, are to make it more novel rather than getting it all the time for free. Team queue is now added to the game. You can queue up with anybody as long as you have a full party. However, everyone must be on the same platform. Onto the hero changes. Orisa's Fortify damage reduction has increased from 40 to 50%. The devs say we are increasing the effectiveness of Fortify to make Orisa a stronger counter against team compositions that lean on crowd control. Bit of an odd comment because Fortify already countered crowd control, so the rationale here doesn't make too much sense. They increased the damage reduction. Regardless, Orisa is one of the best answers against crowd control because she has multiple tools in order to make herself more durable. One of the more strange lines of reasoning in Overwatch 2, when the game launched, we were all pretty happy that the game wasn't so counterpick heavy. Then they progressively made counterpicking more and more severe, almost as if that's the goal of the game, which is a little disappointing. Next changes to Ramattra, the Ravenous Vortex. The projectile now passes through enemy heroes, but is still blocked by barriers. The devs say sometimes the Ravenous Vortex projectile hits an enemy and bounces off unpredictably, delaying its activation. This quality of life change improves the ability's consistency and makes it easier to use against groups of enemies without fear of accidental collisions. The biggest tip for Ramattra's Ravenous Vortex is to use it to complement the zoning of your barrier. Between the shield and the vortex, you can control the brawl in front of you until you have pummel active. And now, this change allows you to do that more freely without fear of it bouncing off an enemy. A buff to Reinhardt, the barrier field's maximum health has increased from 1200 to 1400. The devs say we are increasing Reinhardt's barrier uptime to help him protect his allies. We'll be keeping an eye on this as we want to avoid situations where players feel like they're always shooting at barriers. Buffing Reinhardt's shield is usually seen as a net positive among most community members that I talk to, because other values, for example, like armor health, is much more punishing as a raw stat number. Either way, it's sort of like extra health on the character that you have to manage as the tank player, but armor health is a lot more brutal, so when they switch that around multiple times, Reinhardt could literally go to be unkillable in some situations, whereas the barrier takes a little bit more skill and management, I think, and is a bit more fair, especially seeing as, unlike other tanks, when he's got the barrier up, he's not swinging on you. And one annoyance I have with the developers' commentary on this is I feel like they have selective hearing with this whole shooting at barriers thing. Shooting at one barrier was never too bad, but shooting at multiple barriers in Overwatch 1 definitely was. There's a big difference between those two ideas. Reinhardt's shield always felt fair to everyone as far as I know. It's just when you stacked it with other shields or there was multiple shield characters in the game where it got kind of crazy in the first game. Having a single tank in Overwatch 2, I don't think anybody has really complained about any of the barriers in the game. If anything, the tanks have over-the-top cooldowns in offense, but the barriers are pretty easy to sidestep or work down. There's one of the more fair things that tanks can do now. On to the next change, Wrecking Ball's quad cannons. The manual reload time has been reduced from 2 to 1.6 seconds. This does not affect the automatic reload while transformed into a ball, which is still 2 seconds. The devs say Wrecking Ball rarely reloads his quad cannons manually due to the automatic reload triggered while transformed into a ball. This change makes reloading without changing forms a more viable option. I like this a lot in theory, but it's such a small numbers increase, I don't know if you would notice. At least as a ball player myself, I think this will feel better to play because the downtime of needing to reload takes years, it feels like. And sometimes as the tank in Overwatch 2, you really need to anchor your position for your team, not just roll away and reload. Onto the damage category, Sojourn gets a buff. The number of shots to reach maximum spread has increased from 8 to 12, and the spread overall has reduced by 12%. They've changed this number so many times. The devs say we are decreasing the overall spread on the railgun primary fire to help Sojourn build energy more consistently. The increased shots before reaching maximum spread will give players more direct control over aiming the projectiles when firing in short bursts. I mean, 12 shots isn't that short of a burst. I think the reality of Sojourn's balance is that since a lot of the other characters in the game, especially like Cassidy, who is directly competing for this medium range damage dealer option, he has so much utility that Sojourn just doesn't have. And the uniqueness of her mobility is nice, you just kind of don't need her kit right now in the meta. But I think her playstyle suits it quite a bit. She's just lacking some of the extra tools now in comparison to the other, I think, over-buffed characters in the category. Speaking of over overbuffed. Soldier 76 is getting a buff again. The damage has been increased on his heavy pulse rifle from 18 damage to 19. Biotic Field's healing per second is increased from 35 to 40, and Helix Rocket gets a damage explosion increase from 80 to 90. I already thought this was a good character for like 90% of players. These buffs, I think, are a little bit over the top in order to compete with some over buffs in the category. The devs say one of Soldier 76's strengths is his reliable damage output, but it hasn't been quite effective enough after his last round of changes. We'd like to avoid getting all the way back up to 20 damage on his primary fire, since that has proven to be too powerful in the past, so instead, we're adjusting his primary and secondary damage slightly. He will also be able to stay in the fight longer and support his team more effectively with extra healing with Biotic Field. I really think Soldier 76 in the entire history of Overwatch 2 has just been a pub stomper for 99% of players. It's a change like this that I think looks a little odd, considering the ramifications it could have, seeing as there really isn't very effective long-range damage dealers anymore, and buffing him in that environment seems a bit heavy-handed to me. Changes to Symmetra. The Photon Projector secondary fire maximum impact damage has increased from 45 to 50. Secondary fire maximum explosion damage increased from 45 to 50 as well. So that's 5 extra damage on each part of the damage, 10 total, and it regenerates up to 30 shield health per second when primary fire deals damage to barriers or enemies with shield health. So alternate fire gets 10 extra damage, and Sim will be able to leech shield health off of shields, giving her sort of a pseudo lifesteal passive, sort of like Reaper has. In order to compensate for this, they're nerfing the sentry turrets quite significantly. The damage per second has reduced from 40 down to 25 on the turrets, but they now have a special attribute. The turrets now reveal enemy heroes to your allies while dealing damage for an additional 1 second afterwards. The devs say Symmetra is exceptionally map dependent, to the point where she is oppressive in certain situations, yet ineffectual in others. Should it be ineffectual or ineffective? I don't know, I gotta whip up my thesaurus, I guess. The devs say the following changes increase her weapon's effectiveness while lessening some of the frustration caused by her turrets. I think they should have dealt with the slow effect that it applies, but they say the Photon Projector primary fire is now an even more pointed counter against certain heroes due to its conditional shield health regeneration, and the secondary fire now takes 1 less fully charged projectile to eliminate most heroes. Changing a breakpoint there is going to make it significantly better. They say Symmetra's turrets are especially powerful when focusing on the same target due to their combined total damage output coupled with the slowing effect. We are lowering their raw damage and angling them towards utility to make spreading them out a more viable option. That's interesting. So in a way, it's almost like sentries from MOBA games. You place them to kind of scout the area. I'm not so sure that's in effect how they will be used. Like, I wonder if they're still most effective at stacking them around a corner on Li Jiang regardless. Do you really need a situational map hack on like one corner of the map? We're not playing attack shooter after all. I'm not so convinced that's what they'll be best at, but we'll have to see. Changes to Torbjorn as well. The Rivet Gun's secondary fire spread has been reduced from 5 to 4.5 degrees. Changing spread values is a very powerful thing in Overwatch because of the wide range of hitboxes in the game. This means at closer range, the spread is going to be more lethal because it can hit more headshots accurately on a variety of targets as well, especially better against tanks, but better against everything. It's almost like a damage increase if you think about it, because more of your pellets will hit, but no change to his primary fire. However, Overload now reloads 6 ammo on use, which now, especially with the better shotgun, is going to allow Torb to pop the Overload in order to engage in a duel when even he doesn't have any ammo. Because pro tip, you Torb players, ideally you want to use Overload when you're committing to a fight and save your reload animation for when you're safely out of the fight. Overload does increase your reload time, but you would rather get more DPS or dueling power out of that cooldown. Of course, all of this brawling capability is to offset the nerfs they're putting through to the turret. The deployed turret damage has been reduced from 14 down to 11, and the cooldown is increased from 10 to 12 seconds. The devs say Torbjorn's turret has a little too much of an impact for little investment, so we are shifting some of its power to the rest of his kit to reward more accurate gunplay. Overload now partially reloads ammo, which guarantees that there is no downtime between activating the ability and shooting projectiles. As an avid Torbjorn player myself, he's one of my top DPS because he's a bit more about game sense and supporting your team as opposed to needing to be the full-out outright carry. I think this is pretty healthy for the game because the secret about the builders in Overwatch is that they were disproportionately effective for most players, and again, regardless of how they balance them, going to be limited at higher skill tiers where the DPS players have skill sets of hitting heads. So regardless of the balance of the game, the higher skill ceiling characters will always perform a bit better at higher tiers unless these types are overbuffed or just have some specific meta lane in order to compete. Even though this will hurt my SR a bit, I'm sure, I think it's a very healthy change for the game because these turret characters were wreaking havoc for the metal ranks especially. Way too much value for just placing down a turret for both Symmetra and Torbjorn. So along with like the sniper changes and other reworks they've been doing to the game, this is starting to culminate in some good news, where the playability of Overwatch 2 is increasing over time. Now onto the support category. Kiriko is getting healing Afuda reverted, so a buff overall. Recovery reduced from 1 to 0.9 seconds. The devs say originally we increased the Afuda recovery time to promote more kunai usage between healing bursts. Despite that benefit, we are partially reverting that change so that primary fire feels more responsive in situations where Kiriko is pressured to focus entirely on healing. Always feels a little silly when they keep changing things back and forth, but I will admit it's better than them not changing at all. Regardless of what this value rests at, Kiriko is a dominant support character due to how she plays Overwatch 2. The flexibility and skill ceiling alone in a game that gets scrappy and deathmatchy, and you need to be the type of character that can survive late into a fight when kills are traded out, Kiriko's always going to be good in that environment. Always able to hold her own and contribute towards eliminations, even outright duel. So as long as her healing is even competent, she was still good. So this just makes it a bit better, a bit more responsive. Yet again. Some changes to Zenyatta. Discord Orb's maximum range has reduced from 40 to 30 meters. And the time to wear off the target when not in line of sight has been reduced from 2 to 1.5 seconds. The devs say the combination of these changes will make it riskier for Zenyatta to apply Discord and increase counterplay for the effective target. This range decrease, I think, matters quite a bit, because while in theory you could feel like diving Zenyatta is supposed to be the right play, the time-old tradition of countering dive with your poke characters, which in theory should be diveable, is poking the dive out first. So if you are able to do too much damage to the Winston or Diva, whoever, who is trying to close the distance, they're not ever really going to have the HP in order to get on top of you. So it's on the ranged poke characters to pressure out those types of angles to drain the resources before the dive can ever really occur. 10 meters is a pretty massive range. And we've already talked about the snipers getting reduced in effectiveness. So in some medium and longer range duels, Zenyatta won't be able to activate his best ability. But I think this mostly affects tanks. Where there's a lot of ranges, I'm thinking like Midtown A, where Zen can sit at a safe distance, put the Discord on the tank, and good luck ever crossing the gap, as a lot of the tank characters in the game, with a Discord permanently on you with a big concave angle for the entire enemy team to shoot you at. While at certain ranges that can still happen, it not being able to be applied for that new 10 meter of safety zone is a lot of damage that's not on your face. And on tank characters especially, who have armor health, that's like all the difference of being able to have armor health or not, which makes you melt. This is a big buff to tanks closing the distance. And then the time to wear off the target when not in line of sight being half a second shorter means that a lot of that zoning potential, especially against flankers that try to dip around a corner when a Discord is on them, is now reduced. So the uptime of the entire enemy team has just gone up significantly. That's another pretty big nerf. This means Zen players are going to have to rely on their aim and their snap kick a lot more to defend themselves. Whereas before, the mere threat of the Discord orb on a key target might just mark them out of the fight until it wears off. So these are pretty big Zenyatta nerfs, to be honest, in two key situations where he was really contributing maybe more than intended. But I will say with Zen, the tricky part is as soon as he starts to lose some of these extra pillars to his game, then all of a sudden he's getting overwhelmed and easily destroyed. Then it tends to fall upon the other support in the game, and if they're even able to keep Zen alive in those situations. Because now what this means is Zenyatta is going to need a fight to be closer and more committed to get his value, which puts him at threat. There was also a long list of bug fixes, as there always is. I didn't notice anything that I thought was too standout. Maybe even some annoying ones that I thought would hopefully make this patch, such as the Kiriko teleport bug. I don't think that's fixed. Let us know in the comment section down below what bugs are or aren't fixed properly. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave the video with a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.